Grace and peace to each of you this day. This is Pastor Jen Mitchell coming to you from First Presbyterian Church in Karn City, Texas. We started this children's series about how to talk to your children about the different situations and issues that are going on around the nation with violence and hatred and how to respond to those events in more peaceful ways, how to respond to racism and injustice and protests that are going on that your kids might see on TV and in their own communities, perhaps. We started this series off with a book called God's Dream. It was kind of an overarching book that talked about how and what God's dream was and how God helps use us and gives us the tools to make that dream come true. If you remember in that video post, some of those ways to make God's dream come true was sharing and caring and playing with each other and reaching out in ways that are helpful to people and that lift people up, lift children up and lift adults up who may be sad or having a hard time. And when we do that, at the end of the book, it tells us when we do that, that makes God happy. And we know that that makes God happy because we can see a rainbow in the sky. And we can all be a part of making God's dream come true by how we interact, how we work with each other, how we love each other, how we support each other. So we're going to continue this series with another book called White Flower. Now this book is actually a poem that was taken and put into a book format with beautiful artistic images and pictures in it. And this book is based on a true story that happened in Tennessee. And the author will go through and tell this story and explore how when people come and they're being hateful or they're not being nice, they're being mean to others, how we can respond in a way that is creative, that is humorous, instead of using more mean words or more mean actions when we respond back. So we're going to read this story. Again, it is called White Flower, and it is written by David LaMotte, and it's illustrated by Jen Hales. And again, it is based on a true story about how to fight hatred with humor. So let's see what this story tells us. The day was bright and sunny as most May days tend to be. In the hills of Appalachia, down in Knoxville, Tennessee. A dozen men put on their suits and quickly took their places in white robes and all those tall and pointed hoods that hid their faces. Their feet fell down in rhythm as they started their parade. They raised their fists into the air. They bellowed and they brayed. They loved to stir the people up. They loved when they were taunted. They didn't mind the anger. It's exactly what they wanted. As they came around the corner, sure enough, the people roared, but they couldn't quite believe their ears. It seemed to be support. Had Knoxville finally seen the light? Were people coming round? The men thought for a moment that they'd found their kind of town. But then they turned their eyes to where the cheering had its source. As one, their shoulders crumpled when they saw the mighty force. The crowd had painted faces, and some had tacky clothes, their hair and hats outrageous. Each had a bright red nose. The clowns had come in numbers to join the grand parade. They laughed and danced that other clowns had come to town that day. And then the marchers shouted, and the clowns all strained to hear. Each one tuned in intently, with a hand cupped to an ear. "White power!" screamed the marchers, and they raised their fisted hands. The clowns leaned in and listened. They couldn't understand. Then one held up his finger and helped all the others to see the point of all this yelling, and they joined right in with glee. "White flower!" the clowns shouted, and they reached inside their clothes. They pulled out bags and tore them, and huge clouds of powder rose. They poured it on each other, and they threw it in the air. It got all over baggy clothes and multicolored hair. Now all but just a few of them were joining in the jokes. You could almost see the marchers turning red beneath white cloaks. They wanted to look scary. They wanted to look tough. One reached right out at the clowns in rage and was hauled away in cuffs. But the others chanted louder, marching on around the bend. The clowns all marched on too, of course, supporting their new friends. "White power!" came the marchers' cry. They were not amused. The clowns grew still and thoughtful. Well, perhaps they'd been confused. They huddled and consulted, this bright and silly crowd. They listened quite intently. Then one said, "I've got it now. White flowers!" screamed the happy clown, and all the rest joined in. The air was filled with flowers, and they laughed and danced again. Everyone loves flowers, and white's a pretty sort. I can't think of a better cause for people to support. Green flower stems went flying like small arrows from bad archers. White petals covered everything, including the mad marchers. And then a very tall clown called to the others to attention. He choked down all his chuckles and said, "Friends, I have to mention that what with all this mirth and fun, it's sort of hard to hear. But now I know the cause that these paraders hold so dear. Tight showers!" the clown blurted as he hit his head in wonder. He held up a camp shower, and all the others got under. Or at least they tried to get beneath. They strained but couldn't quite. There wasn't room for all of them. They pushed, but it was tight. "White power!" came the mad refrain, carefully pronounced. The clowns consulted once again. Then a woman clown announced, "I've got it! I'm embarrassed that it took so long to see, But what these marchers march for is a cause quite dear to me. Wife power, she exclaimed, and all the other clowns joined in. They shook their heads and laughed at how erroneous they'd been. The women clowns were hoisted up on shoulders of the others. Some pulled on wedding dresses, chanting, "Here's to wives and mothers." The men in robes were sullen. They knew that they'd been defeated. They yelled a few more times and then they finally retreated. And when they'd gone, a kind policeman turned to all the clowns and offered them an escort through the center of the town. The day was bright and sunny, as most May days tend to be, in the hills of Appalachia, down in Knoxville, Tennessee. People joined the new parade, and the crowd stretched out for miles. The clowns passed out more flowers and made everybody smile. And what would be the lesson of that shiny southern day? Could we understand the message that the clowns sought to convey? Seems that when you're fighting hatred, hatred's not the thing to use. So here's to those who march on in their big red floppy shoes. The end. So, who's in this story? Well, we have those marchers who are in the story that were in the white robes and the white hoods that covered their faces. And then we had the silly clowns who had makeup on and bright red noses and had really funny clothes and baggy pants. So we had those two groups in this story. What was the group that was covered in white? Were they nice? Were they mean? Were they sharing a message of love and peace and bringing people together? Or did they care only about themselves and what they wanted? And they wanted, if you listen to the story, they wanted anger from the people. They wanted the people in the town to be angry and to get behind their cause that they were better than anyone else. But then you have the clowns. And the clowns came out and they met this group of men and perhaps women in these white robes. And they had a different message. They had a message for the town and also for the men and women in the white robes to say, your message of hate and your message of meanness and your message of anger, it's not welcome here. And what we want to do is we want to spread love and joy and humor and be creative and each be unique, be who God created us to be. So those clowns came out with that message for the town that day. And the whole town, they didn't get behind the men in white robes. They didn't support those men and women. They supported the clowns because the clowns were funny and they were light and they wanted the whole town to come together in joy and in peace, not in anger and in hatred. And many times around our nation, we sometimes see those things happen. We see people who, for whatever reason, maybe they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, or they have an idea that they're better than someone else, But for whatever reason, sometimes people will come out and try to bully others and try to get people to be mad and angry. But that doesn't do our heart any good. That makes our heart sad. So what these clowns did, instead of being mean right back to these men, they chose a different way. They chose to be creative. They chose humor, and they chose laughter and joy in order to have those men and women in white robes leave their town. So instead of there being a big angry fight in the town, those men and women in white robes simply left because what they came to do wasn't being done. They couldn't do it because they had these clowns that were there to spread a different message, a better message. They were there to spread God's dream of caring for one another, of supporting one another, of spreading joy. So I want you to think about how when you face a bully at school, or someone who's not being nice to you or to someone else, or someone who is not caring or not sharing, instead of doing something mean back to them, how can you find a creative way to use humor and joy and love to teach them a lesson of how joy and peace and love makes your heart happy, and it makes everyone else around you happy? I want you to think about that as you go through your week, and we will join back here next time for another story about how we can come together and learn about each other and love each other and support each other. Let us close our time this afternoon in prayer. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for the gift that you created of joy and laughter and humor and creativity and art and music. We thank you for those things that help fill our hearts and make us happy. We ask that you encourage us to use those gifts of joy and laughter and love and sharing and caring when we see things in our world that are not nice, that are mean. Help us to address those situations not in mean ways, but in joyful ways and in humorous ways, in order to fight back in a way that is nonviolent. We pray all of this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.